Three men just boarded America's most powerful aircraft carrier, and what they're about to do there could trigger the biggest regional conflict in 50 years. But here's what nobody's telling you about why they're there. Saturday morning, February 8th, 2026, Trump's top negotiators flew to the USS Abraham Lincoln in the Arabian Sea. Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and Admiral Brad Cooper, the man who commands every American military asset from Egypt to Pakistan. They just spent Friday negotiating with Iran in Oman. The talks failed. Iran refused every demand. And now, less than 24 hours later, these same three men are standing on the deck of a $13 billion nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. Why? CNN reported this morning that the visit was to thank the troops. That's the official story. But here's what actually happened on board that nobody's reporting. They met with the F-35 pilot who shot down an Iranian drone 3 days ago. The drone that flew straight at the carrier without clear intent. The drone that got within striking distance before being destroyed. Think about that. An Iranian drone penetrated carrier defenses and got close enough that pilots had to scramble. That's not supposed to be possible. Not to American carriers. Not ever. But wait, it gets worse. Witkoff posted photos from the visit. You can see him standing on the flight deck watching F-35's launch. You can see him touring the command center. You can see him talking to sailors who know that Iran is preparing to target their ship. Because here's the part that should terrify you. While these three men were thanking troops on board the Lincoln, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi gave an interview, published 6 hours ago, and he said something that changes everything. He said, "We hope talks resume soon, but make no mistake, our red lines remain firm." Red lines. What red lines? Missiles. Iran will never negotiate their ballistic missile program. That's what Araghchi means. And that's exactly what Israel Prime Minister Netanyahu is demanding Trump force Iran to accept. So now Trump is trapped. Netanyahu arrives in Washington Wednesday. CNN confirmed it this morning, and Netanyahu's office released a statement saying, all negotiations must include limiting ballistic missiles. Must include, not should include. Must. Translation. If Trump comes back from talks without missile restrictions, Netanyahu will view the entire negotiation as a failure. And we know what happens next when Israel decides diplomacy failed. But here's where the carrier visit becomes critical. Trump sent his negotiators to the Lincoln for one reason, to show Iran and show Netanyahu that military options remain on the table, that while talks continue, overwhelming force sits ready in Iranian waters. The message, we're negotiating, but we're also prepared, except there's a massive problem nobody's discussing publicly. Douglas Macgregor, former senior Pentagon advisor, warned 11 hours ago that the Lincoln is vulnerable. Pravda published his assessment this morning. He specifically mentioned that China has provided Iran with advanced anti-ship capabilities, long-range missiles designed to sink carriers, real-time satellite intelligence showing exactly where American ships are positioned, technical assistance integrating these systems into Iranian defensive networks. Macgregor didn't mince words. He said the Lincoln could be in serious danger if fighting begins, that American planners are underestimating Iranian defensive improvements, that China and Russia are providing support specifically designed to counter American military advantages. So when Witkoff and Kushner toured the Lincoln yesterday, they weren't just thanking troops. They were assessing readiness. They were briefing commanders on diplomatic failure. They were preparing for scenarios where negotiations collapse and military options become necessary. And here's the timeline that should concern everyone. Friday. Talks in Oman end without progress. Iran refuses missile discussions. Both sides agree to meet early next week. Saturday. Witkoff and Kushner visit the Lincoln, assess capabilities, talk to the pilot who downed the Iranian drone, brief crew on potential operations. Wednesday, Netanyahu meets Trump in Washington, demands missile restrictions be included in any deal, warns that Israel will act unilaterally if America doesn't force Iranian compliance. Next week, talks resume in Oman. Iran repeats that missiles are non-negotiable. America demands missile limits. Talks fail again. Then what? Markets already know. Bitcoin crashed to $70,000. Gold is volatile. Stock indexes are nervous. Energy futures show elevated risk premiums. All because investors understand the timeline and they see where it's heading. When American negotiators visit aircraft carriers between diplomatic rounds, that's not confidence. That's contingency planning. When Israel's Prime Minister flies to Washington demanding specific concessions that Iran has already rejected, that's not optimism about peace. That's preparation for alternatives. When former Pentagon officials start warning publicly about carrier vulnerability and Chinese support for Iranian defenses, that's not speculation. That's professionals seeing indicators that concern them deeply. The Lincoln visit yesterday wasn't about morale. It was about messaging. Telling Iran, we're serious about military options. Telling Netanyahu, We're preparing for scenarios where you demand we act, telling American commanders, be ready. But will it work? Can Trump navigate between Iranian refusal to negotiate missiles and Israeli demands that missiles must be part of any deal? Here's what nobody understands about Netanyahu's Wednesday visit, and why it creates an impossible situation for Trump. Netanyahu isn't coming to discuss options. He's coming to deliver an ultimatum. Multiple Israeli sources confirmed this morning that his position is final. Ballistic missiles must be restricted to 300 kilometers maximum range. 300 kilometers. That's the distance from Iran to Israel. Anything beyond that range threatens Israeli territory. So Netanyahu's demand is simple. Iran cannot possess weapons capable of reaching Israel. Now think about how insane that demand actually is. Khaybar-Shikan missiles, Iran's most advanced ballistic systems, have 1,500 kilometer range. Iran has deployed 2,000 of these weapons in underground facilities throughout the country. They produce 300 new missiles every month, and Netanyahu wants Trump to negotiate reducing missile range to 300 kilometers. That's an 80% reduction in capability. That's Iran voluntarily dismantling their primary deterrent against Israeli and American power. Why would Iran ever agree to that? They wouldn't. They won't. Abbas Araghchi said it explicitly yesterday. We will never discuss our defensive capabilities in any negotiation. Never. Not maybe. Not under certain conditions. Never. So Netanyahu is demanding something Iran has publicly stated they'll never concede. And he's telling Trump, get this done or I'll do it myself. That's the impossible position Trump faces Wednesday. If Trump tells Netanyahu, sorry, Iran won't negotiate missiles, then Netanyahu will authorize Israeli strikes on Iranian missile facilities without American approval. And when Iran retaliates against those strikes, they'll hit American bases throughout the region because those bases supported Israeli operations logistically. Trump gets dragged into a regional conflict he didn't authorize. But if Trump tells Netanyahu, okay, I'll force Iran to accept, then talks collapse because Iran simply walks away. No negotiation, no compromise, just immediate diplomatic failure followed by, what? Military pressure? Economic sanctions that already failed? Hoping Iran changes their mind? Neither option is good. Both lead toward escalation. And this brings us back to why the Lincoln visit matters so much. When Witkoff and Kushner toured that carrier yesterday, they were telegraphing to multiple audiences simultaneously. To Iran, see this $13 billion vessel with 6,000 sailors and 75 aircraft? It's parked in your maritime approaches. We can use it. To Netanyahu, we're serious about military options if diplomacy fails. Don't feel like you need to act unilaterally. We're positioned and ready. To American military commanders, diplomatic failure is increasingly likely. Prepare for scenarios where political decisions require military responses. To global markets, negotiations continue, but we're managing all contingencies, including kinetic options. That's sophisticated messaging. One visit, multiple meanings depending on who's watching. But here's what McGregor's warning adds to this calculation. If Trump authorizes strikes using the Lincoln, and if China has indeed provided Iran with advanced anti-ship missiles and real-time targeting intelligence, then that carrier faces genuine risk. Not theoretical risk, actual operational danger. Anti-ship missiles travel at hypersonic speeds. They carry warheads designed specifically to penetrate carrier defenses. And if Chinese satellites are providing real-time positioning data, Iranian forces can target moving vessels with precision that didn't exist even 5 years ago. Sinking an American aircraft carrier would kill thousands. It would represent the single worst American military loss since World War II. And it would trigger automatic escalation to levels nobody currently wants to contemplate. So Trump's military advisors are telling him, the Lincoln gives us options, but using those options carries enormous risk that may not be worth the strategic gain. Meanwhile, Netanyahu is telling him, use the Lincoln or I'll authorize strikes anyway and you'll face the consequences regardless. And Iran is telling him, try using the Lincoln and watch what happens to your 6,000 sailors. This is the environment heading into Wednesday's meeting. Trump needs to tell Netanyahu something. He can't say no because Netanyahu will act independently. He can't say yes because Iran won't budge and military options carry catastrophic risks. So what does he say? Based on the Lincoln visit, here's the likely play. Trump will tell Netanyahu that military preparations continue while talks proceed, that America is postured for various contingencies, that if Iran maintains its current position, options exist to change their calculation, vague enough to sound like support, specific enough to suggest seriousness, but ultimately non-committal about actually authorizing strikes. Netanyahu will leave that meeting unsatisfied. He'll return to Israel and brief his cabinet that Trump is hesitant, that America might not follow through, that Israeli unilateral action remains necessary. And sometime in the next 2 to 3 weeks, Israel will strike Iranian missile facilities claiming they waited for diplomacy, but it failed, and they can't accept the threat anymore. Iran will retaliate. American bases will be hit because they supported Israeli logistics. Trump will be forced to defend American forces, and the regional conflict everyone's trying to prevent will begin anyway. That's the trajectory. The Lincoln visit doesn't prevent it. It just manages optics while the collision approaches. So here's what the next 2 weeks look like, and why the Lincoln visit tells us more than any official statement could. Monday through Tuesday, Netanyahu travels to Washington. His team prepares briefing materials showing Iranian missile production rates, deployment locations, and threat assessments. They prepare satellite imagery of underground facilities. They prepare arguments for why waiting only makes the problem worse. Wednesday, Netanyahu meets Trump. He presents evidence. He demands action. He warns that Israel cannot wait while Iran builds more missiles every month. He reminds Trump that Israeli voters elected governments that promise security, and that means eliminating the Iranian missile threat permanently. Trump will listen. He'll nod. He'll say he understands Israeli concerns, but he won't commit to strikes. Because his military advisors, the same ones who briefed Witkoff and Kushner on the Lincoln, have told him carrier-based operations against Iran carry unacceptable risk. So Netanyahu leaves Wednesday's meeting without the commitment he came for. Thursday through Friday, diplomatic teams prepare for next round of Oman talks. America drafts proposals that include missile restrictions. Iran drafts counter-proposals that explicitly exclude missile discussions. Both sides know before meeting that positions are incompatible. Next week, talks resume in Oman. The same shuttle diplomacy through Omani mediators, the same unbridgeable gaps, the same public statements afterward about constructive discussions that accomplished nothing concrete. Except this time, Netanyahu has already met Trump. This time, Israel knows America won't force Iranian concessions. This time, Israeli military planners start final preparations for unilateral operations. Late February, Israeli fighter jets strike Iranian missile facilities, maybe multiple sites simultaneously, maybe limited strikes on specific targets. But definitely military action that Iran cannot ignore. Iran retaliates within hours. Ballistic missiles target American bases in Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Iraq. The stated reason? American logistics and intelligence supported Israeli aggression. American forces take casualties, maybe dozens, maybe hundreds, depending on how many missiles penetrate defenses and which facilities get hit. Trump faces an immediate decision. Allow American casualties to go unanswered, or authorize counterstrikes that escalate regional conflict further. He authorizes limited strikes, F-35s from the Lincoln launch against Iranian missile sites, the same sites that just hit American bases. Tit-for-tat escalation that both sides claim is defensive. Except Iran doesn't stop there. They launch larger salvos. They target the Lincoln itself, exactly what McGregor warned about. Anti-ship missiles race toward the carrier group at hypersonic speeds. American defenses attempt interception. Some missiles get through. Maybe the carrier survives damaged. Maybe it doesn't. But either way, thousands of American sailors are now in combat against an adversary that spent 40 years preparing specifically for this scenario. And markets collapse. Oil prices double overnight as the Strait of Hormuz becomes a combat zone. Global recession begins within weeks as energy costs spike and supply chains break. That's the scenario the Lincoln visit is preparing for. Not preventing, preparing for. When Trump sent Witkoff and Kushner to that carrier yesterday, he wasn't signaling confidence in diplomacy. He was positioning pieces for the conflict he sees coming but can't stop. Because he can't satisfy Netanyahu without attacking Iran. And he can't attack Iran without risking catastrophic casualties. And he can't allow Israeli unilateral action without getting pulled into regional conflict anyway. So the visit was theater, showing strength while knowing that strength might not be sufficient, demonstrating resolve while understanding that resolve might lead to disaster. Douglas McGregor sees this. That's why his warnings about carrier vulnerability and Chinese support for Iran aren't alarmist. They're professional assessment from someone who understands the gap between political requirements and operational realities. The Lincoln sits in Iranian waters because Trump needs to show he has options. But having options and using options are different things. And using the Lincoln against an adversary equipped with Chinese anti-ship missiles and Russian air defense systems is gambling with 6,000 American lives. That's what nobody's saying publicly. That's what the carrier visit really means. It means we're preparing for a conflict that our own military advisors warn might be unwinnable. It means we're positioning forces for operations that could result in catastrophic losses. It means we're managing optics while hoping somehow the collision can be avoided, even though every indicator suggests it's inevitable. The three men who visited the Lincoln yesterday know this. They know talks will fail. They know Netanyahu will demand action. They know Iran won't back down. And they know that when those three factors collide, the carrier they toured will be expected to execute operations that military professionals think are enormously risky. But political requirements override military concerns. So the Lincoln stays positioned. Negotiations continue failing. Netanyahu arrives Wednesday, and the timeline toward conflict continues. Watch what happens after Netanyahu leaves Washington. Watch whether talks next week produce anything beyond more vague statements. Watch whether Israeli military activity increases around Iranian borders. Those indicators will tell you whether we're really heading toward the scenario everyone fears but nobody can prevent. And if you see Witkoff and Kushner visit the Lincoln again, if they make a second trip after Netanyahu leaves, then you'll know. Because that's not thanks for service. That's final operational briefing before authorization. The timeline is compressing. The visit happened yesterday. Netanyahu arrives Wednesday. Talks next week. Maybe 2 weeks. Until the moment when someone, Trump or Netanyahu, decides diplomacy has been exhausted and alternatives must be attempted. That's where we are. February 8th, 2026. The day Trump's negotiators visited the carrier. The day before Netanyahu demands what Iran won't give. The beginning of the end of diplomatic options.